What's up, guys? Welcome back to Libertalia Game Supply. This week's deck profile will be Doodlemorphia, and if you want to know what that means, stick around and I'll show you here in a second. Make sure if you're liking these deck profiles, you want to see a new non-meta deck profile every single week, subscribe down below, and we'll get right into this one here. First, we got our 3 copies of Dinomorphia Theresia. So this is your main searcher of the deck for the boss monster, the win condition. So on normal summon, it can search a Dinomorphia spell or trap. There are no Dinomorphia spells at the moment, but it is in there. And then it sets it right to your back row. So in the early game, you're going to be searching your Dinomorphia fusion trap cards, that's Frenzy and Domain. And in the late game, you're going to be searching your Dinomorphia interrupt cards, which would just be Brute, Sonic, Reversion, and then potentially Alert if you're trying to pull back some stuff from the graveyard. Then we got 2 copies of Dinomorphia Diplos. This thing isn't really that good. It's here because you don't really have a whole lot of Dinomorphia options. These are the only 2 Dinomorphia main deck monsters, so you need the bodies for fusion summons. When this card is normal or special summon, you can Foolish Burial a Dinomorphia card from your deck, so that's monster or trap or I guess spell, but we don't have any. So that can give you a little bit of setup because you have cards that will copy stuff out of your graveyard, or if you want to get like one of these in your graveyard to set up a special summon out of the graveyard or something of that nature, it can be used for that. Otherwise, if a better Dinomorphia main deck monster were to come about, I could see this going to 1 or possibly 0 in place of something with a little bit more useful of an effect. And then for our Doodlebeast, this is the Doodle part of the Doodlemorphia, we've got Doodlebeast Steggo. This card can special summon itself from the hand if you control no monsters or all the monsters you control are dinosaur monsters. So it's an extra body on board, kind of like a Cyber Dragon. And then when it's normal or special summon, you can add a Doodlebook spell or trap card. Once again, there's only a trap card, so maybe we have a spell coming in the future. But you can add that Doodlebook trap to your hand and then discard 1 card from your hand. Typically, I'm using this to search the Doodlebook, then discard the Doodlebook to get the banish effect of the book and search the Tyranno in the next turn. Then we got 2 copies of Doodlebeast Tyranno. So this is the card you're going to search off of your Doodlebook, so ultimately your Steggo is going to lead to this being on the field. When this card is normal summoned, it can pop a monster on the field, and then if the way it was normal summoned was by tributing a Doodlebeast monster, it can gain attack equal to that destroyed monster's attack. So it's already at 2400, it can become a big monster really quick if you just pop the right card. It also has the effect to be able to tribute summon itself as a quick effect during either main phase by tributing 1 dinosaur monster. So ultimately, you're going to try to use your Steggo on your turn to get a Doodlebook in your graveyard, and then on your opponent's turn, you're going to banish that Doodlebook to search the Tyranno, and then at some point, quick effect your Tyranno to summon it, and then pop something and gain that attack. Then we got 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. Hand traps aren't the greatest in this format, but in this deck it serves an additional function. Apart from being a hand trap and being able to negate special summons from the deck, sending from deck to the graveyard, or adding a card from your deck to your hand, it's also a level 3 tuner, which is necessary to make our Psychic Hand Punisher and our Borreload Dragon. And then into our spells, we got 3 copies of Fossil Dig. So it searches a level 6 or lower dinosaur, which is any monster in your deck other than your Tyranno and your Ash Blossom. So I know we don't play very many monsters, but if you can get any of the ones that this card can search to your hand right away, it'll make that deck function a lot better, and it'll get you to your big plays and start running away with a huge board. We've got the one Called by the Grave, just to try to prevent hand traps if at all possible. Hand traps will really mess this deck up bad, and if you end a turn, especially after turn 1 or 2, on not so good of a board, you're pretty much done with because your life points are so low. And if you get hand trapped in the right spot, you're going to end with not such a great monster on board, unfortunately. So we want to be able to prevent that if possible. And that's it for spells. So for traps, we've got 3 Dinomorphia Frenzy. So this can be activated on your opponent's main phase. It's a fusion trap card that activates by paying half of your life points to fusion summon from your extra deck by using a monster from your main deck and 1 monster from your extra deck. This is by far your best fusion card in the deck because your Rex Term already requires a extra deck monster as part of its fusion summoning material. Outside of that, your fusion monsters in your extra deck are just kind of an extension of your resources in your main deck because you have so few. So being able to access those without summoning them first is super handy. That's why we're playing 3 of that one. And then only 2 of Dinomorphia Domain as our next one. So this is the other fusion trap. It's still good, it's just not as good as Frenzy. So with this one, during either main phase, you can pay half your life points to fusion summon using monsters from your hand, deck, or field. That being the case, you can only use some monsters you've already fusion summoned out of your extra deck, or monsters that are in your hand, deck, or field, obviously. You only have 5 monsters in your main deck that are Dinomorphias, so this thing can run out of materials to summon with pretty quickly. That's why 2 felt like a good ratio. I still wanted to keep it at 2 though, rather than 1, because it's still searchable with Trap Trick at this point, and you want to be able to see it pretty early on, and having 1 might be too few to really count on seeing it. Then we got double copies of Dinomorphia Brute. This thing is a Raigeki Break, essentially. So you can pay half your life points to destroy a Dinomorphia monster you control, and then a monster your opponent controls. This is good because it's removal, as well as all of your Dinomorphia monsters float. So Theresia and Diplos can banish a normal trap out of your graveyard to special summon one of the other. So Theresia can summon Diplos, Diplos can summon Theresia, and then your fusion monsters can all summon something that's like the next level tier below. So the level 8 can summon a 6 or below, the level 6s can summon 4 or below. So you can replace anything you use to activate your Brute, and then you can pop something on your opponent's field and replace your own monster. Then we've got Dinomorphia Alert just at 1. 1 felt good because searching it isn't super necessary off of Trap Trick. You can just search it off of a Theresia if you really need it. But you can pay half your life points to special summon up to 2 Dinomorphia monsters from your graveyard with a total level of 8 or less in whatever, so 2 4s, a 6, an 8, or whatever. And then for the rest of that turn, you can't special summon anything other than Dinomorphia monsters, which isn't typically a big deal because you're mostly focused on fusion summoning anyway, but it can be a big deal if you're really trying to close for game. Because of that, 1 felt fine. I didn't necessarily think I was going to be searching it with Trap Trick too often. Another thing to note with all of your Dinomorphia normal trap cards, these are all the ones that we play. While they're in the graveyard, if you have 2,000 or less life points, you can banish them on your turn or on your opponent's turn at any given time to prevent effect damage from burning you that turn. So that doesn't come up super often, unfortunately, because you definitely play more of the normal traps and the quick play traps, but it does have that effect. So if somebody tries to cowboy you for game, these can prevent that. Then we've got the 1 copy of Doodlebook. This thing's kind of a brick. It sucks to draw, so 1 was more than plenty. You're trying to search it off of that Steggo, so you can discard it off of that Steggo right away. If you happen to draw it, what it does when it's set in your back row is when a dinosaur monster is targeted with an attack, you can negate the attack and then special summon a Doodlebeast from your graveyard. That monster can't be destroyed by battle, but during your end phase you have to destroy it. There's usually not a Doodlebeast in your graveyard if you haven't had the opportunity to search this thing, meaning that its effect ends up being somewhat useless at that point. So really you want to be able to search it and send it to the graveyard. The reason being is when it's in your graveyard, other than the turn it was sent there, you can banish it to search a level 5 or higher dinosaur. Our targets are only the 2 Tyrannos, so that's even more of a reason to just play the 1. But at 1, it's been a pretty cool card. A really nice tech in this deck. We've got 2 copies of Ferret Flames. This thing is insane, especially in this deck. The way it works is, when you activate it, if the combined attack of all monsters your opponent controls are higher than your life points, your opponent has to shuffle monsters back into their deck until the total combined attack of the monsters they control become less than your life points. And in this deck, it's really easy to burn yourself down to 1,000, 500, 250, 125 life points within 1 or 2 turns, at which point it's essentially a complete board wipe for free, and it just removes everything that could be a problem. I kept it at 2 because it makes it searchable off of Trap Trick. I've even considered playing it at 3 still, just because it's such a good card. The only reason it's not is because typically if you can resolve this 1 time, you'd better be winning that game in your next turn because of how much output this deck can have with special summoning from your extra deck. And then we've got 2 Ice Dragon's Prisons. I like this thing because it's also searchable by Trap Trick, and it also acts as graveyard fixing and removal on your opponent's side of the field. So if you're unaware, Ice Dragon's Prison can target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field and negate its effects, then banish 1 monster from both fields with the same type. So typically decks are going to fall within their own lane. So for instance, within this deck, if you Ice Dragon Prison me, all of my monsters are dinosaurs. You can summon 1 to your side of the field and then banish both of them. So now that removes the monster on my side of the field that was a threat, but it also took away that resource that was in my graveyard that I might have needed access to. I still think this thing is super powerful. I know it's not seeing quite as much play anymore, but in this deck where it's searchable, I just felt like it was a really nice inclusion. And then we've got that 2 trap trick we've been talking about, so it's essentially 2 additional copies of all the other trap cards we've talked about thus far other than the Doodle book. To activate it, you banish 1 normal trap from your deck, then set that same trap card from your deck to your field. So you gotta have 2 copies of it in order to resolve that. That trap that was set off of Trap Trick can be activated this turn, which isn't usually that important unless you're activating Trap Trick on your opponent's turn and searching for your fusion traps. And then for the rest of this turn, you're only allowed to activate 1 trap card. So you have to be pretty smart about how you time this. Usually it'll be towards an end phase if you didn't need access to a different trap in your deck up until that point. So you can set it and then the turn ends. And then that restriction is no longer a worry for you when it passes turn. Then we've got 1 Dinomorphia Reversion. This is a new card I've added into the deck, and I like it a lot in this build. So if you control a Dinomorphia Fusion, you can pay half your life points, banish 1 counter trap from your graveyard, and then it copies that effect. So for instance, we play Solemn Judgment in this deck. If you control a Dinomorphia Fusion, you can pay half your life points, banish the Judgment, and then it copies Judgment's effect. So it's like an extra copy of Judgment or of Dinomorphia Sonic, which is our next trap card. And then with Sonic, when your opponent activates a spell or a trap while you control a Dinomorphia monster, you can pay half your life points, negate and destroy that spell or trap, and then destroy 1 of your Dinomorphia monsters you control. So it's really nice, especially in this deck with a ton of back row reliance, to be able to stop like a Harpy's Feather Duster or some other big board wipe for your back row. And that pop is also usually not that much of a cost because you're able to float every Dinomorphia monster in your deck. We've got our 3 copies of Solemn Judgment. It's just such a powerful card, and it fits so perfectly in this deck because it costs half your life points. You want your life points to be low to get the most out of all of your effects, and it's just super good to be able to negate everything, essentially. And for our final 3 traps, we've got 3 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. This deck only plays 4 spell cards, so being able to limit your opponent's ability to use their spell cards usually ends up being a huge problem for most decks. You're going to shut down searchers, field spells, all that kind of stuff for at least a turn, which gives you a chance to gather some sort of resource or some sort of response to whatever that card is, especially in games 2 and 3 when you already know what they're playing. So this thing's too good to just not play. I suppose you could side it, but I just love the card so much, and very rarely does it have no effect on the opponent. Onto the extra deck, we got 3 copies of Dinomorphia Rexterm. This is your main monster that you're trying to summon each turn. It requires 2 Dinomorphia monsters, with at least 1 of them being a fusion. And while it's on the field, it's a floodgate, so your opponent can't activate the effects of monsters with attack points greater than or equal to your life points. On top of that, you can pay half of your life points. All monsters on your opponent's side of the field have their attacks changed to whatever your current life point count is until the end of the turn. And then if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, it can search a level 6 or lower out of your graveyard and special summon it. So it can make the field act in a way that allows its floodgate effect to always be live by bringing everything to your life point count. On top of that, it can really facilitate OTKs because your life points are going to be so low that if you drop everything your opponent controls to 125 life points, for instance, you're going to be able to beat over it with everything you have, and that's going to be the end of the game pretty quickly. Then we've got the 3 copies of Dinomorphia Kentragina. This is going to be your second best fusion in the deck. Second most summoned, I would say, or at least on par with Rexterm most of the time, actually. It requires 2 Dinomorphia monsters, and it loses attack equal to your current life points. So it has 4,000 attack, but it never actually has 4,000 attack. At best, it'll have 39 and some change, which usually isn't a problem. That's going to be more than big enough to beat over most monsters. And it can pay half of your life points to banish a copy of a normal Dinomorphia trap in your graveyard, and then copy that trap card. So it can copy your fusions, it can copy your brute to pop stuff, it can copy your alert to special summon, any of that. And if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Dinomorphia, so it gets you back your Theresia or your Diplos. And we got 2 copies of Dinomorphia Stealth Bergia. This is going to be your least summoned Dinomorphia fusion monster. It requires 2 Dinomorphia monsters with different names. And if you have 2,000 life points or less, you don't have to pay for your trap cards. So Solemn Judgment becomes free. Your fusion monsters on top of that don't have to pay the half their life points to activate their effects. So it kind of puts you in a position where you can save yourself from getting too low. I find that effect to be mostly useless though, because once you get under like 500 life points, you're pretty much equally in a bad position at 500 versus 250 versus 125. You're just one bad play and one attack sneaking through away from getting beat. The better effect, and the reason I play this card, is because once per turn when an opponent activates a monster effect, you can burn your opponent for that monster's attack points. So whatever it is, if they activate that monster's effect, you can burn them for that amount. It can be huge, it can be a game ender. Probably not if they know what this does, because they'll try to play around it, but you never know, you can catch somebody. Even if you don't catch them into a game ending decision, you can drop life points pretty easily just by having this thing on board. And then when it's destroyed by battle or card effect, this also can special summon a level 4 or lower from your graveyard. And then for our two synchros, we've got Psychic End Punisher and we've got Borreload Dragon. For Psychic End Punisher, when your life points are lower than your opponent's, which is pretty much always until you win, it's unaffected by your opponent's activated effects. Also, once per turn, you can pay 1,000 of your life points to banish one monster you control and one monster your opponent controls, so it also acts as removal. And at the start of the battle phase, you can make this card gain attack equal to the difference between your life points and your opponent's life points, which typically is huge, because if you wait to push for game until you've gotten all of your big monsters on field, you're going to have less than 1,000 life points, and they're going to have likely their full 8,000. So this thing quickly becomes a 10,000, 11,000 attack beater, and this thing can end games on its own. For Borreload Dragon, I've been considering whether or not I should keep this in here. If I do keep it, I would probably try to find a way to fit some additional link monsters, but at this point you guys kind of know what Borreload Dragon does already. When he's summoned, you can equip a link monster to it. He gains half their attack and puts Borrow counters on himself equal to that monster's link rating, and then you can negate effects by removing those Borrow counters. It's a super powerful card, obviously, and I want to find a way to include it, just because you already play that Dino Steggo at level 5 that can already special summon itself, so you can have access to this card pretty easily throughout the game, and so finding a way to include it seemed interesting. Beyond that, you don't use half of your extra deck anyway, so playing some stuff that's a little bit more situational isn't so bad. And then for our Xyz, we play the one Baguska as a stall card just to try to negate effects while we build resources. We play the one Lagia. You can detach 2 to negate the normal or special summon of a monster or the activation of a spell or trap and destroy it, so it's pretty much a summonable Solemn Judgment, which we already play 3 of, technically 4 if you count Reversion. We play the one Dolka because you can detach 1 to negate and destroy the effect of a monster when it's activated. And then for our link monsters, we play the one Dark. You can special summon a Dark out of our opponent's graveyard, and then we'd be able to link up into our other link up monster, Nightmare Unicorn. Also, when it dies, it can search a Dark monster from your deck with 1,500 or less defense, which is all of your Dinomorphias, so it has that natural synergy. And then for the Unicorn, it's a Link 3, it's generic, so it gives you access to that Dark Link climb, which could then put this in the graveyard, giving you access to this Link 2 for your Borreload, and that ability to discard 1 to bounce 1 isn't so bad. I could see this being any number of other Link monsters if you just preferred one over the other. It's pretty easy to get enough materials to make a Link 4 or even a Link 5, so in that case access code immediately comes to mind, but for now Nightmare Unicorn works pretty well just because of the Link climbing synergy off of Dark in the first place, but I could see that being something else. And that'll do it for this week's deck profile. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're interested in testing this deck out for yourself, giving it a go. If you do and you come up with any interesting tech choices of your own, leave that in a comment down below. If you want to see deck profiles like this every single week of non-meta decks where we explore some of the finer things in Yu-Gi-Oh!, make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Happy deck building. Have a good one.